Hey guys, it's Sidney Galpern from SimiCakes.com.
And Nicholas Lodge from NicholasLodge.com.
So we are here today at the Sweet Chalet shop in Sanford, Florida, and we are going to be collaborating our skills to make a vintage Valentine's Day centerpiece. So I'm going to be making some things out of Simi Isomalt.
And I'm going to be working with Gumpaste in my Flower Pro range.
So it is going to be a great time, and I hope you come along with us.
So for our Vintage Valentine collaboration, I'm going to use some of my Flower Pro. Flower Pro is a unique line of veiners molds that I developed in collaboration with Katie Sue Designs. And Flower Pro has with the assisted package, so there actually are 18 full-length YouTube tutorials which you can find on Katie Sue, on Nicholas Lodge, or you can search on obviously just on YouTube, put Nicholas Lodge, and you'll see all of those come up. They're both little short ones and then full-length tutorials. So in this particular project, I'm going to be, for Valentine's Day, making some beautiful red roses, some leather leaf fern, and some baby's breath or gypsophilia.
I'm using Simi Isomalt today, so this is a pre-cooked isomalt tile. And so it is already gone through the tempering process, it's ready to go, which means no recipes, no temperatures, nothing. Super, super easy. All you have to do is melt it in the microwave for about 30 seconds and then 15-second intervals until it's a liquid. So when we were planning this display, we wanted a really pretty base to put it on. And of course we can just use a regular cake board, we can cover a board, but one really cool and kind of creative way that you can make bases and boards for your displays and for your cakes is to find old frames or trays or platters. We actually went to the thrift store yesterday, so we were looking around for some different kind of things that we could repurpose and use, and we found these beautiful frames. And so all we did was we took the glass and whatever the photo in it that it came with out, and what we're going to do is we just fill in the center with an edible medium. So you can use isomalt, you can use sugar paste, whatever you have, icing paper if you want to have a pattern, and that way it kind of gives a little bit of detail. We actually even painted on this frame the edge of it with some confectioner's glaze and the same gold that I'm going to be painting on my decorations so that all the color tones are the same. I'm going to be using silicone molds for this project, so these are all Simi Silicone Molds. You can use any silicone mold as long as it is high heat, because isomalt is very, very hot. It's about 300 degrees when you're working with it, so make sure that you are very careful. Don't stick your finger in it. Make sure you're wearing your gloves. I highly recommend cotton gloves and then a nitrile or latex glove over top of that to protect your hands. And so the molds that I'm using are going to be rated for that nice high heat. So I have my beautiful vase mold that I'm going to be using. So this is a two-part mold. That means the halves go together, and that way you get a nice 3D finished piece. So I put the two halves of the mold together here, and then I just put the sleeve right over the outside, and that is going to keep the two halves together. In addition to that, I am going to be putting on some rubber bands, so I'm just going to kind of space them out all the way down the mold. I did mix a little bit of color into my isomalt, so I mixed in a liquid airbrush color. You can use a water or alcohol-based color. In this case, I used a nice leaf green, just a little bit of it, so it wasn't too intense. I wanted kind of a pale green color, and that way it is going to match really, really nicely with the beautiful flowers that Nick is going to do. And then I did re-microwave and bring the isomalt back to a boil. So I melted the isomalt first and then mixed the color in, and then to get any bubbles out, I brought it back to a boil and let it settle before I'm going to pour my mold. So I'm filling the mold all the way up, or at least as far up as I can. Now if you don't reach all the way to the top, it's okay, because you can kind of swirl it around a little bit. And we are actually going to make this hollow, right? Because we want to be able to use this as a vase and actually put flowers in it. So I'm not going to just leave it filled, I'm actually going to pour the isomalt back out into my bowl, and that's going to create a coat or a shell all around the outside. So if there's any spots that didn't quite fill, and to make sure that it gets in the little lip around the top edge of the vase, I am just going to kind of let it pour out and rotate it, and that way it coats all the way around. And once I know that every side has been filled, I'm just going to drain it all the way completely out until there's no excess left. And I'm going to actually repeat this process because I want it to have a double layer. That way it's twice as strong, and it's going to make sure that it is not going to break on me. So once I get all the excess out, I'm just going to scrape the edge and repeat this process. I'll probably do about 3 or 4 coats just because this is a little bit bigger of a mold. I want to make sure it's nice and strong. I'm going to pour a few other molds here for some more decorations on our vase as well as on our base and just some little accent pieces. So I'm just filling the mold with Isomalt, and because these are silicone, you don't have to grease them or powder them or anything. They will come right out when it's cool. And I'm just spreading it into any little cracks and crevices and details using my silicone tool. You can also use a toothpick. For the base of our sculpture, of our centerpiece, we are going to be using this frame mold. So I'm going to pour the frame, but this is a little bit too small compared to all the other pieces that we want to make and put on it. So what I'm actually going to do is, after I make this frame, I'm going to deconstruct it. So I'm just going to pour the outside, and then I'm going to also pour an additional one once this is cool, and I'm going to cut them apart and actually reconfigure them to make it an extra long frame. So it's actually going to be 2 frames put together. That way we have a little bit more space. To add the inset face to my pocket watch, what I'm going to do is I'm first going to fill the mold about halfway up, just to the first line, with clear Isomalt. Then I'm actually going to cut out an icing image clock face that I printed out on my edible printer, and I'm going to add that on to the first layer of the liquid Isomalt. Now I don't just want to fill the mold all the way up and then put the picture on the back, because this way, if you kind of do it half and half, where I fill half the mold, it makes it look like it's encased in the Isomalt. I do want to make sure that I let this cool before I add the next layer of Isomalt, because the clock face can move around, and then I will fill over the back of the pocket watch with more clear Isomalt and paint it later. So I'm just going to let all of these pieces cool. Now it depends on the temperature of the room and how big the mold and how deep the mold is that you're using. It will vary how long it will take to cool. But the frame will take probably about 25 minutes or so. The little brooches will only take maybe 5 to 10 minutes to set at room temperature. The vase I'm going to leave a little bit longer because it is trapped in all that silicone. So we're going to leave him for at least 45 minutes or so before we unmold it.
So with Flower Pro, obviously the Flower Pro, as I said, has this is a book that goes with Flower Pro, and there's a lot of information in here. This talks about the paste, colors, it talks about the size guide, and there is actually a separate YouTube in Getting Started with Flower Pro where I actually go into in-depth conversation talking about the types of paste I would use and things like that. So I'm not really going to get into that too much in this particular segment. But when making obviously roses, we're going to need to make some rose cones, and rose cones are what we obviously use when we actually make roses, and these are made from gum paste. If you have time to let these dry for 2 or 3 days, you can also use half gum paste, half fondant, or even straight fondant. But if you were doing these in rolled fondant or in sugar paste, as we call it in Europe, you would need to leave these for about 2 or 3 days to dry out. In gum paste, you need 2 or 3 hours. So if you were doing this as a sort of a project, what Sidney showed, obviously pour in the vase, that needs to cool down for 1 to 2 hours. So that's really where you could then also be making things like your centers of your flowers, your baby's breath, your rose leaves. So it means that when you, rather than just sitting there, you can be doing other productive items. So the rose cone mold has 3 cavities, large, medium, and small, and I'm going to be making the larger size rose for this particular arrangement. And so I'm going to be using the large cone, using here an 18 gauge wire. And as I said, you know, obviously this is just a sort of shortened version of my full-length YouTube tutorial. So check those out to go into depth with this. And of course, roses, this is a 14-inch length wire. You can make these on 7-inch, 8-inch, 9-inch, 10-inch, depending on how you're using. With the project that Sidney and I are working on, we have obviously a fairly large green depression glass style vase. So I'm actually doing the roses on full-length wires. But if you were doing a smaller arrangement for a smaller vase or for a cake, you could of course do them in whatever size you want. So you're going to take some floral tape. This is half-width floral tape. This is cut with a tape cutter. Again, on the full-length tutorial I show how to do that. And you can also use a pair of scissors. And we make a floral tape bud. So you're just going to take your floral tape and we're going to go around, so 10 times, and then you're going to make a hook. Hook this, and then I go 20 times. And this is what we call a floral tape bud. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. But at each of the components of the Flower Pro, there is separate videos, YouTube videos for those. Plus also, as I said, there's one on Getting Started, which talks about measuring on the size guide. So I'm not going to get into too much detail with this. This is the size guide, which comes with the book. So it's actually part of the book. So at the back of the book, there is a size guide. And so we're going to use for this particular rose a number 13 small ball of paste. Now this is the white Renshaw Gumpaste. Renshaw Gumpaste comes in these 500 gram packs, and there are two 250 gram pouches in here. This particular one is the red, and so you're just going to use this. And for the cones here, I'm just going to use this straight from the pack, because straight from the pack is going to dry the quickest. So this is a number 13 small. I'm going to take just a little bit of egg white, which is what I normally use as a glue. I'm going to put a little bit of egg white onto the floral tape bud, and I'm going to insert this into my number 13 small size ball of paste. Just going to mold this around. So you're going to mold this around, so you see how I'm encasing the floral tape bud in the actual cone here. And I'm going to make it to a basic cone shape. And then I'm actually going to then take the mold. Now you can actually use this mold in two ways. In the book it actually shows two options of doing half cones, where you make a half cone, you put the floral tape bud in, take it out of the mold, let it dry, and then you make the second half. And of course there you're going to have a seam like my pine cone mold, but it's not going to be noticeable. Or you can do an all-in-one cone. So when we do the all-in-one cone, basically what you're then going to do is you just rotate this in the cone mold, and you see how the excess paste will actually just sort of come down here at the bottom there. All right, and then you can just take a pair of scissors to just take this out of there, and then you see you're just going to get rid of that little bit of excess paste from the mold. And just go back in there, and then you're just going to rotate this in the mold. So you see how you're actually turning this in the mold like this. And then these can be used for all sorts of flowers, like magnolia buds and things like that. But you see how this is going to mean that every time you make this cone, it will be a uniform size, okay? So you need to take this out. This would need to dry for, 3 or 4 hours if you're making this in gum paste. As Sidney said, depends a little bit on ambient temperature, also humidity levels as well. A lot of times when I'm doing sugar flowers, I use a food dehydrator. So you could actually put this in the food dehydrator or hang this in the food dehydrator, and that's going to dry it out even quicker, all right? But you need to make sure that is dry before you move on. For making the red roses, I'm going to create a beautiful blood red color. So what I'm actually going to do here, and again, this is all in the book and on the videos. So what I actually have here is I have 85 grams of Renshaw red gum paste. And you can see this is a nice red. This is actually what I would use for, say, my Flower Pro poinsettia, holly berries, things like that. But when we think about Valentine's Day, we think of more of a slightly blood red color, a dark red color. So what I'm actually going to do here is I'm going to take this formula is 85 grams of the red gum paste, and then what I'm actually adding to that is I'm going to add 10 grams of purple rolled fondant or sugar paste, and I'm going to add 5 grams of brown rolled fondant or sugar paste. So what we actually have here, this formula is 85 grams of gum paste and 15 grams of rolled fondant, 10 grams of purple, 5 grams of brown. And what this means is that adding the rolled fondant to the gum paste is going to extend the working time we have and make it a little bit not dry quite as quickly, okay? So add in purple. I know this looks a little weird, but when you take the purple and the brown and we add this to the paste, and you're going to just add a little bit of vegetable short into this and knead this through, what this is going to do is going to give you this almost like a sort of a blood red, a dark red color. You see? That's how I'm just going to knead this through. And you see how then you're going to get this beautiful red rose color. And this formula is in the book, and there are several different formulas for the different flowers that I show made in the book. The Renshaw gum paste is a vegan product, so it doesn't contain any egg whites, so making it suitable for vegans and vegetarians. But it does dry pretty quickly. So I found, with different color combinations, using 85 grams of gum paste and 15 grams of fondant added to the 85 grams, what that does, it gives you a paste that, especially for flowers like peonies or roses where you're rolling them very thin, it's not going to dry quite as quickly. For making things like the rose cones, where we want them to dry quickly, we just use straight out of the pack. So this is my paste prepped. So now what I'm going to do is, once my rose cones are dry, I'm going to move on to the next stage of creating the petals. So once the cone is dry and we've prepped our paste, you can make the paste more elastic. So again, for peonies and roses, so typically what I'll do is I'll use a paintbrush, a little egg white, or something I actually do in my classes. A little tip is I use a small little pipette. This would be used for, like, chocolate dipped strawberries. So you just suck up a little bit of egg white into this, and then you can just put like a little bit of egg white onto the top here. here. And then you can actually just take a toothpick and just put that in the top of the pipette, and so you can keep egg white in there, just put it in the refrigerator. But what this does is adding the egg white to the paste will give it more elasticity and stretch. So for flowers like roses, peonies, orchids, flowers like that, this is what, remember this is a vegan product, by adding egg white to it will give it more elasticity. Okay, so that would be how you prep your paste. Now, with making the rose, as I explained, you know, there's obviously in the book it goes through step by step. There's also, of course, the YouTube videos which go through obviously all of the actual steps here. So just showing you the basic concept of the Flower Pro. This particular mat was designed to, that you vein on this, you soften on this, and you actually build on this. So this has got, see, one part of the mat has got layer 1, layer 2, layer 3, layer 4, and then this is the second part of the mat. So when we're actually doing the numbers sequence, you're just following the number sequence here, or on the second or the third or the fourth. Now I've already pre-rolled out some paste, and as I said in the YouTubes, obviously I actually show this all the way through. This has gone through a KitchenAid pasta machine on setting number 6. And this particular size one I'm using here, this is actually an 11 centimeter or 110 millimeter cutter. This is the largest size commercial blossom cutter. I'm usually just using a cornstarch bag, just rub a little cornstarch if your paste feels a little sticky, and especially if you've added obviously egg white to it. I used a little scraper here. This is a wonderful way to actually get your paste on and off of the veiner. So I use this a lot, they're very flexible. And then what I do is I'm going to take the second part of the veiner here, is going to line this up on the top. And then I'm going to use a little Flower Pro press. So this is actually a little press, and what it's going to do is going to distribute the weight. You can also actually, on the YouTube, I show using a cake board, which will also, like a cake board or a styrene board, would work well as well. But you're just going to just press this onto the top. So this just helps to distribute the weight onto here. You can just pull this off, and you see how you're going to have the beautiful veining onto the petals here. Okay, and so then what we're going to do is just going to take this off of the veiner. Now it doesn't matter which side you use because it has veining on both sides, but we're just going to turn this over. I'm actually going to place it on the back of, you can use either side of the veiner. Usually I use the one with the sequence on. And then we're actually going to soften on this. So we're actually going to take my balling tool here, and I'm just going to go around the edge of the petals. So thinking of like an eraser on a pencil. So I actually will just go around. So this will actually, you can soften on this. You know, in traditional flower making, we use a foam pad, but this was designed, this whole concept, so it really is a one-step process, so you only need one piece of equipment once you've cut it out. So this is the side I soften, which ultimately will be the back. I'm going to turn this, take this, and then you're actually going to place it, so this is the side I softened, so this will be the back of the petal, and we're just going to position this onto the mat here, like so. So you can see that obviously each of the petals are here. So it's just showing you the basic concept. Take in some egg white. So with my egg white, I'm going to use my egg white. I'm going to brush my egg white all over my cone. I use typically egg white. Some cake artists use edible glue, but I've always preferred egg white. And so I'm going to position this, make sure that's in the middle here. Obviously the mat has got a hole in the center of it, so you're just going to just pop the cone through here. And you see how this is going to then come up to sit onto here like so. Now on the sequence, so on the sequence here, layer number 1 will be petal number 1, then it's petal number 1, which is here, then we're going to do petal number 3 and 5, then petal number 2 and 4. So you can see this is petal number 1. So what I do is I use a combination of the little scraper, and then in the with the filler flower mold, which is actually what I use for the baby's breath, which I'll be talking a little later on, there is this little companion tool. So this is a little green stick, so actually some of my students have named this the Nick stick, and it's a very useful little stick, and as I said, we can use that. But basically what you're going to do, you're going to take petal number 1, so it's going to come up the side of the cone like this, and then we're actually going to pop the right hand side, and then the left hand side is going to come around. So what you actually have done is you've encased the cone with this first layer of petals. Okay, and then you're going to go to number 3, and I'm doing this sort of sideways on, so it's a little bit easier for you to see what's happening here. So I'm going to come up about halfway up with my egg white on petal number 3, and as I said, this is where like the little stick, you see how the little stick will flick this up. You're going to wrap this around, and then we're going to come round to petal number 5. So the petal number 3 and then 5, and these will tuck into each other, and so these will form a sort of a yin and a yang, and will give me the second layer of petals for the rose. Okay, and then we're going to go on to the last layer for this first rose, which again we're going to come up about halfway up with my egg white, and this is going to be petal number 2. So petal number 2, and then we're going to come round to petal number 4. All right, so you're just following that sequence. Then you can remove this from the mat, and then these ones will just sort of overlap just very, very slightly. And just make sure that the center of the rose is straight, because sometimes it will move a little bit. And that will be basically the concept of how we would make the first layer of petals, okay? And then the idea is that obviously if you wanted a mid-size rose, you would then continue with another layer. You can do the third layer, which will take it to full size, and then 4 layers will give you fully blown size. This is an alternative, obviously here in the book here actually shows the pink variety of roses, but you can actually see here. So this actually shows you the stages. This is the bud I've just shown. This is with 2 layers of petals, with 3 layers of petals, with 4 layers of petals. So remember on the YouTube, the full tutorial, obviously it's over an hour long. I go through showing you each of the steps and the slight difference. And then also you can make a bud. The bud is shown on the YouTube, and that's made with a cone the same color as the rose, and then 2 individual petals. Once the roses are made, you need to obviously let those dry, and then of course then you'd put a calyx on, and then you would dust those the color of choice. In the case of the red rose that I'm dusting, the red rose is actually featured in the book here, and this actually is shown again on the video. So these were actually dusted with a ruby, and then I used an aubergine color, which is this beautiful sort of purpley red color, like an eggplant color, into the middle of the roses. You'll see the roses used a little later on in this presentation. So here you can see the finished roses, all right, made to the instructions in the book and on the YouTube. So with their beautiful color, you can see the calyx on there. And in the rose cone mold, there is actually a thorn mold. So you can actually see here on the roses, you can see these roses have got thorns on them. And this really sort of enhances the realistic look for the rose. And then I've accented this with some leaves. The leaves were made with the Flower Pro leaf veiner. And obviously you can make different size leaves, again, following directions in the book or on the free. Remember, these are all free YouTubes to access. You can watch obviously the how to make the rose leaves. So these will be the roses I'm going to use. I'm actually going to use several of these in the vase that Sidney made in the first part of this segment, and the depression glass vase in the green will look really fabulous with these beautiful red roses in it.
So when you're ready to unmold your pieces, you always want to check with a toothpick or a tool, not with your finger, to see if they are set up and cool. Just in case it is still liquid, you don't want to be sticking your finger on it. So just kind of tap it, make sure that it's all set up and nice and cool, and then we're just going to flex the mold and release our finished piece. There we go. So we can see I have our nice frame here with the hole in the middle. Now I do have some rough edges on it. It's not completely smooth and perfect, so I do want to go ahead and torch over those to take any rough edges just from spreading it around that I may have gotten. And so all I'm going to do is put it face down on my mat to make sure that I am not going to torch away any of the detail on the front of the frame of all of the little swirls and filigrees. So I'm just going to put it face down, and now I'm torching and just tracing the edges with the torch, and that is just going to melt and smooth any excess that may be kind of poking out over the sides. When I unmold really smooth pieces like my little perfume bottle and my pocket watch here, I can see that there's a little bit of a dullness to it. It's not quite as sharp and as crystal clear as I want it to be to look like glass. So what I'm going to do with these smoother pieces is I am going to torch over the surface, and that is going to melt away any little bubbles that may have naturally just stuck to the silicone when the Isomalt was poured into it, and that way it's going to be nice and crystal clear. Now I don't want to do this step on anything that has any sort of fine detail because it will melt them. So any of my brooches or jewels, I want to skip this step because I don't want them to be melted and dull. I want them to retain that nice sharpness to them. When I spray all my finished pieces with the edible clear glaze, it will replicate this step very, very closely. So it's not a big deal if you can't torch it, but if you can, I like to just swipe over it a little bit, and it just completely changes it and makes it nice and bright. And like I said before, I am going to go ahead and deconstruct this frame. And what I mean by that is I'm going to cut it in half, and then I have another one that I've already cut in half, and we're going to put those two halves together to make one long frame. So I always try and look at my molds not only for obviously what they're intended to look like, but how I can break them up and use them for different things, you know, to get the most out of all of my molds and to make some kind of unique shapes. So when I cut this, because of the way the scrolls work, I want to make sure that I cut it so that they're going to fit together. So when I cut this frame here that I have already pre-done, I cut it vertically. So I cut it long ways up along the frame. So now when I cut my next frame, I want to make sure that I cut horizontally, just because there is a really big swirl here at the corner, and if I cut them both the same direction, they're going to hit each other and it won't have that nice consistency and look like one whole piece. You'll have a gap where the two don't meet up properly. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to torch where I want to cut. So I'm going horizontally right in the corners here, and I'm going to kind of follow along the inner line that is here already. I'm torching a little bit on the front, and I don't have to worry about melting the details now because we are just going to cut right through them, so it's not a big deal. And then what I'm going to do is after I let this sit for about 10 seconds or so, I flip it over and I'm going to torch on the back, because the torch only heats up the surface, so if you only do one side, it's only going to heat up that side and the underneath will still be too cool and could crack when you try and cut it. So by letting it sit for about 10 seconds or so, it's letting the heat sink into the center and it is cooling off the surface a little bit, just so that you're not sticking it to the mat if it's too liquidy right when you torch. So I just kind of go in layers until it's going to be soft enough to cut. Depending on how heavy-handed you are or light-handed you are with the torch, it could take twice, it could take 10 times. There's no right or wrong to it. It just needs to be nice and soft. I can see that it's starting to kind of bend a little bit, and I'm going to be able to cut through. And I can tweak this a little bit too, so if I did accidentally cut it crooked or anything like that, Isomalt is very forgiving. So all I have to do is just reheat it and tweak it a little bit. So to assemble the frame together, I'm basically just going to heat in between where I want the two to bind. So I'm just melting it a little bit, and then I will just slide the two pieces together. Now if you have any little gaps or anything in between where they meet up, what I do is I just take some little bits and pieces from the scrap pieces that I cut off. I just kind of took my scissors and carved off a bunch of just little tiny shards of it, being very, very careful. I'm just going to kind of heat and fill in any spots with my extra pieces. And if you heat over them a little bit, they'll just kind of melt right in. And then if it is kind of still a noticeable spot, I'll just put one of my decorations over it, make sure that it's all nice and covered. But generally, once we get it all put together and it's painted, you can't even tell where those two separate pieces were put together. Once the joints that you just attached together are completely cool, I switch my mat out for a non-stick baking liner sheet, and that is going to make sure that, I find with the silicone mats sometimes if you pour directly on them, they bubble up a little bit from the heat, but something so thin like this is not going to. So this is just like an oven liner sheet, non-stick, it's coated, so it will release from the Isomalt once it's cool. So I just transferred it onto that kind of mat, and now I'm going to pour my Isomalt in. So I wanted a nice opaque color for this rather than a transparent color, which is the natural finish of Isomalt. So I mixed in a little bit of petal dust. So petal dust is going to give you that opaque finish when it's mixed into the Isomalt rather than transparent. Now you never want to pour your Isomalt right when it comes out of the microwave, for especially things like this where we're pouring it on something that's cool, some cool Isomalt. I don't want it to bleed together, especially since they're different colors. So I let it sit for just a couple minutes after it comes out of the microwave, not only to get all the bubbles boiled out, like I show in some of my other videos going more in depth on how to take bubbles out of your Isomalt, but it's also going to cool off slightly. So it's still pourable, but it's not so hot that it's going to bleed and melt the colors together when they touch. So I'm just going to fill up to the top edge just about of my frame, and then we will leave this to cool at room temperature until it is completely solid. So I've left my vase for about an hour. So this is really, really nice and cool. I can feel the mold from the outside is not warm to the touch anymore. It's nice and cool. When I kind of tap on the inside with my tool, it's all nice and solid. Now to take off some of these little bits on the top, what I'll do, sometimes you can just crack them off, but because this has a really, really thin top lip, what I like to do is take my torch very lightly, not too much. You always want to keep moving and you don't want to burn the mold, but I just kind of take my tool here and I'm just going to kind of start prying those up and folding them up, and that way when it's warm it's less likely to crack. And we can clean the top edge up later. It's more so just about releasing it. Just being very, very careful with the heat here. And then we can clean all of the roughness up. But I just want to make sure that when we start flexing our mold, it doesn't cause anything to crack because it's holding on to those excess pieces. We're just going to remove the rubber bands. And I'm going to slide off the sleeve first. And now there's a little bit of a suction that goes with taking these out, so you don't just want to pull the pieces apart because you don't want it to cling and accidentally break. So we're going to go very slow with this, very careful, very gentle. I'm going to go on the seam that runs down either side of the mold, and on either side of that seam I'm going to take my thumbs and I'm going to push downwards and outwards, and that's just going to help release some of the air and kind of get the air up and underneath it, and that way it comes off a lot easier. So see, I'm just kind of coaxing it apart. I'm going to do this on both sides. So once I start kind of feeling resistance on one side, I'm going to switch and just start working my way down and releasing it bit by bit. I can slide my fingers down the seam a little bit. The key with this is just to really take your time. Don't rush it, practice your patience skills. So once I start to have it feeling like it's going to release, I just lightly set it on its side, and I'm going to start working it upwards and releasing the bottom as well and getting that air up and under it. And there we go. So you can see the first half of our beautiful green vase here, and I'm just going to slowly flex it, just like an ice cube tray, kind of jiggle it around and release the other half. And there it is. So to clean up the top edge, you have a few different options. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll actually just take a lightly greased electric griddle and I'll use that as a nice hot flat surface. And what I'll do is I will just press it down onto the griddle and it gives you a perfectly flat, smooth top. Now you can also, if it just needs a little bit of tweaking, you can lightly torch around the edge. Just a little, and then I flip it and press it down onto my silicone mat. And so that is just going to kind of simulate that heating and then using that nice flat surface to just clean up that top edge. And you can repeat that depending on how much excess you have, or if you're planning on covering it up when you put your decorations or your flowers or foliage or whatever you're going to put into your vase, you can also just not worry about it. Depending on if you are going to see it or not, you can spend the time making it as perfect as you need it for your project. So I'm unmolding some of my brooches a little bit early, so they are cool enough to actually release and hold their shape, but they're still a little bit soft, so I can actually bend them to the shape of my vase. Now if you accidentally let it cool a little bit too long, I can just zap it with the torch from the back. Again, we don't want to melt any of the detail on the surface, but I can just lightly torch it, and then I'm just going to bend it to the shape of my vase and lightly torch to attach it on. These pieces are going to be perfect to put on top of our vase as some decorations because we do want it to have that depression glass look, that very vintage look to it. So I'm going to attach these directly onto the vase, just lightly torching it to stick them on. We don't want to melt the vase because it is hollow. Just a little bit of torching and sticking it onto the vase, and I'm piecing them together to get that kind of shape to it. So you can obviously mix and match whatever brooches and shapes and jewels that you want to theme your vase or whatever you're making to what you want. But I just kind of played around with some different molds that I had and pieced them together until I found a design that I really liked. So of course, once this is cool, you can leave the center just as it is, but I want to add a little bit of texture, a little bit of something going on to kind of draw your eye. So I'm using the small continuous quilter impression mold here from Katie Sue, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to heat up the surface of wherever I want to put the impression in, and I'm going to press the mold into it. So I'm avoiding the areas that I don't want it, so just right on the white. And I'm doing this before I paint so that I don't burn any of the paint. And I just do small sections at a time to make sure it stays nice and warm. And the nice part about this mold is it is continuous, so I can line it up and it will match up to the opposite end. I'm just going to get it nice and melted and lightly press. Now remember, the torch only heats the surface, so you don't want to do too much pressing because the underneath is still cool. Now if you didn't press or if you didn't heat enough, what you can do is actually just remelt it back smooth. Any little bits of impressions that came out, you can remelt, and then you can redo it, but it gives it that beautiful texture on the top. So I'll just go back in any spots that I may have missed with the torch to get it nice and soft, and I will keep going so this whole thing is impressioned. So painting always makes a huge difference in how realistic and how much depth you can get into your finished pieces. It really is just that final touch that brings everything to life. So I mean, you can even see I have some pieces that are already pre-made here. So this is the exact same color, and you can see one that hasn't been painted compared to the ones that have, and it just really, really makes everything pop. It makes the reflections of the Isomalt come out really nicely. So painting is just, it makes a huge difference. So you can see I have the frame that I just made here that's just it is a very, very beautiful gold, but when you go back, and especially something kind of Victorian and vintage like we're doing, antiquing it and adding those dark colors and those shadows and those highlights, it really, really just makes a huge difference in how it comes out, and it just makes it look a lot more put together and a lot more finished. So I like to paint and shade all of my pieces, even if it's just a little bit of luster dust, even if it's the same color as what I'm making. It just helps the light to reflect, especially with Isomalt. So what I'm going to do for this specific project is I'm just taking a little bit of brown gel color. Obviously it is up to you what colors you want to do, but I'm just taking a little bit of brown gel color and I'm adding some shadows into the low points of my mold, and I'm not really being too specific in where I put these, other than I want it in kind of the valleys. So you have the hills, you have the high points, and then you have the deep spots or the valleys. So I'm just putting them in all of the kind of areas that would have a shadow or that would have depth to them. And then to clean the whole thing up and to add that brightness back into it, make it look a little bit more put together, I go back over it at the end with just the gold. And sometimes, depending on how much depth I want, I'll use different shades of gold. Sometimes I'll use a very light gold for the very, very tips of the high points, and then I'll use darker and darker and darker as it goes into the shadows. And that is just going to help to make it nice and realistic, and it looks really, really well, especially with photographing.
So in the vase we're going to use some leather leaf fern, very much a classic when you use roses, when you buy roses in the florist, in the grocery store. A lot of times you have roses, leather leaf fern and baby's breath, so that's really what I'm emulating. So if you were, for example, giving Valentine's flowers to somebody, a lot of times the roses would have baby's breath and leather leaf fern. So this is my Flower Pro fern mold, which has become a very, very popular mold. It's a beautiful mold, and you can use this to make individual fern fronds, or obviously multiples, and then one of the large ones to obviously make, you know, so you do like 2 or 4 small, 2 or 4 medium, 2 or small, 4 large, so you can make different size configurations of ferns. As with all of the Flower Pro, obviously they do come with a full leaflet here, so this obviously leaflet goes through, obviously showing basically what is in the book here, and then of course, as I explained, we have the video tutorial as well, which shows how to do this. In the book, obviously the book goes into coloring as it does on the video, and obviously you can see here in the book it sort of shows this all step by step. So I'm just going to show you the basics of this, and on this particular diagram in the book, and then it obviously tells you the size. So for example, for the larger fern frond, which would be this one here, so on this larger fern frond there, which is this one here, that would be a number 7 small size ball of paste. That means it goes through the hole in a 28 gauge wire. So that is the one I'm going to actually show you. And so here we have, as I said, this would be a number 7 small on the size guide. So sometimes we make the ball that goes through the hole, and sometimes we make the ball that sits in the top like a nest. But remember, in the introduction YouTube, you can watch that if you've never used the size guide before. I'm just going to condition this. Now this is actually just Renshaw green gum paste straight out of the pack. I haven't added any fondant to this, and this can be done with just, as I said, a simple, just a little bit of egg white added if you needed to. But because this is a more basic, I'm going to make this into a little carrot shape. A little bit like almost like a chili pepper shape. Then I'm going to take my 28 gauge wire, and I'm just going to dip the wire into egg white. So I'm just going to dip the wire into egg white, or you can brush the egg white onto that. And I'm just going to push this into the carrot of paste. So this is going to just go into the carrot, and it's going to mold around the bottom. All right. And basically you want to make the carrot usually about 2/3 of the length of the mold. All right. So you can see here about 2/3 of the length of your mold. Now, you can put a little bit of cornstarch onto your paste if you need to. It's going to be gained depending if your fingers are a little sticky or if you're working in a slightly humid environment. Usually I used a little cornstarch on my paste here. I'm going to put this into the mold. Initially I'm going to just press this in with my fingers, and then I'm actually going to take a cosmetic sponge. So the way I use my molds is using a cosmetic sponge. What you see what I'm doing is actually pressing this into the mold. So this will make it go into the mold here. And you can also do like Sidney showed, using a Dresden tool as well. You can use like the Luatico one that Sidney was using, but you can also use a Dresden tool as well. That is a good way to get the paste into there. Now in the mold, there isn't on the smallest size leaf, which you can see here, but on the next size up leaf, there's this little, almost like a little island there. It's just like a little tiny hole in the leaf, which is obviously the natural look of the leaf. And then the third one up here, you can see there's actually like again a little island here, right here. So what I do there is I take my paste down, and then I'm going to use my little scraper, and I'm actually just going to scrape that off with my, you see, with my scraper. So you see how I've actually opened up that little island, and then I'm just going to repress the wire back into there. Just bring the paste up, so the wire will be embedded back into there. Now on the, when I did the Flower Pro videos, this fern video was shot about a year ago. We didn't have a back to that, but in the November of last year of 2018, we introduced the poinsettia, and this is actually the back of the poinsettia. So those of you that are watching that have the fern mold and also the poinsettia mold, you can actually take the back of the poinsettia. You see how it's got this little ridge in there, so you can actually line that up with the wire. So you actually position the wire, so you see how the wire is going to be in the middle of that little V shape. And you can actually use this as a sort of a back veiner. So you're then just going to press that onto your, and so this will actually vein the back of your ferns. All right, so this is a sort of new technique that I'm using, because as Flower Pro evolves and as we bring out more products, we're integrating the products into each other. So if you wanted to vein the back of your ferns, you can actually use the back of the poinsettia. So now once we've got the back veined, if you wanted to, you're just going to flex the mold here, going to take out your fern. You see how you have this beautiful fern, and then this you can actually, because the wire goes in pretty much to the end, you can bend that if you want to. You can pinch it like a little sort of taco shape, and then you can just pull away any excess paste and just mold that around, so that just sort of comes around like this. And then the idea is that you just let these dry. They don't take too long to dry, about an hour. And of course you would also make, this is the end part of the fern, and then basically once you tape them, you're just going to put a little bit of floral tape about a ½ an inch down, following the directions, and then you just sort of start basically building up the fern, and you just continue down. And as I explained, you can do sort of any combination. So this is one of the ends, and then I have 4 of the small size, I have 4 of the medium and 4 of the large. But if you wanted a smaller or larger fern, you could obviously add as many sets as you want to. So you're always going to be working in even numbers. This was dusted with a little bit of gray. I used a little bit of gray, a little bit of super pearl, some forest green around the edge, but this could of course change color depending on what other flowers you put in with it. And then lightly steam this just to sort of set the color, and you'll have this beautiful coloring onto your fern. So those are our leather leaf ferns ready to go into our vase a little later on. So the last component of the vase flowers is going to be baby's breath or gypsophilia. So remember, when you often buy red roses, you get baby's breath and leatherleaf fern, which you've already talked about. So baby's breath is actually made in my filler flower mold. And so here you can see some of the baby's breath. And so this is probably one of the most unique molds in the Flower Pro line. This one particular mold will actually make 24 different flowers. So you can actually bring in the one in the book here, so you can actually sort of see the mold, and then this actually shows all of the 24 flowers. So all of those flowers are made without any cutters whatsoever, other than the calyx on the cherry blossom and the calyx on the jasmine, which is made with a little cutter and stephanotis. All of these are made just using little balls of paste or Mexican hats of paste. And so there actually are 9 separate U-tubes on this one flower mold alone. We've broken it down into sort of 9 sections, okay? So the one I'm going to use now, this particular part of the mold here, is going to be this one here, and they look almost like little pine cones. And this is actually used for baby's breath, it's used for mimosa, it's also used for pussy willow. So there are 3 different flowers made. So that one segment on YouTube shows those 3 different options. Now when we make the baby's breath, we're using 28 gauge wires, and we're going to make the little buds. So these are actually measured on the size guide, number 1s and number 2s, and this is regular size. So when we measure on the size guide, you actually put that on there like that and like that, so that it will actually just sort of sit in there like a little, about 1/3 below the hole, okay? So it's very small, it's running around there like that. So you're just going to just sort of rest it into the hole like that. So they sit above the hole. And so you're just going to literally just, when I made these for this particular, I made actually like about 30 of each size ball of paste, and you just keep them under a little pot. And then all you're going to do is literally just take your little ball of paste, you're just going to dip your wire into egg white, and you're just going to just put that onto the end of the wire. So it's very, very easy to do, you see? So you're just going to literally just put this little ball of paste onto the end there. I'll show you a number 2, size 1. And so this is going to be a little bit bigger. So again, just 30 gauge wire. So that's the thinnest of the wires. So those are very easy to do. All right, those will be the little buds. So you just sort of make, 50, 100 of each of those, depending on how many you need. And you can see these are the little buds, obviously at the end of the baby's breath. And then we move on to the flowers. Now, when we make the flowers are actually made number 3 and number 4 small, okay? So you're going to then, in your size guide, remember this is in the book, on the directions inside the filler flowers as well. And so you need a number 3 that goes through the hole and a number 4 that goes through the hole. So in the leaflets, now in each of the Flower Pro, there is a very extensive leaflet. Obviously this has the search for the lessons. And in this particular leaflet, obviously this does show the baby's breath here, the stephanotis, and also the hydrangea, okay? But as I said, so they have very informative. So I'm going to just show you the larger of the flowers. So here we're going to use the mold. It looks, as I said, like a little pine cone. So you're just going to just take each time you use paste, you're going to just condition it. So you're going to touch your finger on a little bit of vegetable shortening, or in Europe call this vegetable fat. And then you're just going to put just a little cornstarch or corn flour onto there. You drop that into the bottom of the mold, okay? And this is a little companion tool. Now this is a gift with the Flower Pro. So when you buy this, you actually get the little companion tool included. We also do sell the little mini pad, which I'm going to show you in a moment. We also do sell this, and that also has a little companion tool with it, all right? So this is a great little pad for small flowers. So I'm going to use the small ball tool end and just going to press that down lightly to impact that into the mold. Here I'm going to take a pair of tweezers, and I'm going to make a small little tiny hook on the end of the wire here. So this is literally about a 1/16 of an inch. It's a fairly small little hook on the end of the wire. I'm going to put that into egg white, and I'm going to just push that into the paste, and then using the actual mold, I'm going to flex the paste. So you see how I'm actually pressing this around the mold like this, okay? This is the same way that we use for the hydrangea buds and some of the other buds as well. Now when we make pussy willow and when we make mimosa, which is, you can see here, the mimosa here, the yellow paste will be bigger and it will fill the mold to the top. For the baby's breath, because it's a relatively small flower, we don't fill it up completely. And then all I do is when you take that out, I'm just going to mold around the bottom so you get like a little bit of a smooth coming down to the wire. And I'm actually going to use my little mini pad. I'm going to use the needle tool end of my companion tool, and with this I'm going to just go around the edge and I'm going to just sort of ruffle the edge of this. So it looks almost a little bit like a little carnation. You can see how it's actually filling around the edge of the paste here. It's quite tiny, but you're just going to fill around the edge with the veining tool. So you're going to get this little sort of feathered edge. And then taking my needle tool, I'm just going to press that in to the paste 4 or 5 times. You create this almost like a little tiny blossom shape on the end. And that's sort of basically how you make the little flower. And then you let these dry, all right? They don't take long to dry, so probably like, 45 minutes to an hour. And then I'm using here a Rainbow Dust food art pen. So this is a unique pen from Rainbow Dust that has 2 ends. So one end is really very fine, like an ultra fine Sharpie, and then the other end is like a regular food art pen. So I'm going to use the fine end of this, and I'm going to do 5 little lines on here with the very fine end, and that makes the little calyx on the baby's breath. So just going to use the fine end, so just 3, 4, 5 little lines onto there. And then for the flower part, I'm going to do the same, but I'm going to use the wide end here. And so with the flower, so I'm going to do like 5 little lines on here with the wide end, and that is how we make the little calyx. And then you're going to assemble that, where actually I take, on the videos you will see on my YouTube, I take floral tape, half-width floral tape, and then I cut it into thirds with a pair of scissors. So it's really, really skinny. You can also use quarter width, but 1/6 width is the best. And then you just group these together in little groups. And then I've added here a 22 gauge wire to sort of bring this down. And so obviously you just can do different configurations and groupings here of the baby's breath. But you can see it's very realistic, but it looks really beautiful when you have your roses or other bridal flowers, but especially with roses, it's a sort of very iconic flower to use with those type of flowers. And it's really fun to make and very easy with the Flower Pro. So that is the baby's breath.
The Flower Pro molds are also silicone, and I got the chance to try them with Simi Isomalt, and they work fabulous. Simply pour the Isomalt in and let it set, or pull the Isomalt and use the veiners to add texture just like on gum paste.
So now we've made our roses. I actually have 4 fully blown roses, 1 mid-size and 1 bud, 3 sprays of ferns, and 4 sprays of baby's breath.
It's beautiful.
Well, thank you,
so pretty.
Sydney. And so, this is like a half a dozen of roses. So basically I put this together very much like you would if a floral designer was doing this to go into a vase. So literally I just, underneath the point of where all the leaves meet, I've just sort of gone around with my floral tape a few times, you can see here. And then what I've done is, of course, I'm just pulling out the stems. And you just want to sort of trim your stems. So if you could maybe bring in the vase here.
Yes.
So we want to think about, yeah, that's perfect. Because what I want to do is just like fresh stems, you would obviously cut these to fit inside the vase.
And kind of create a platform almost for them to sit.
Exactly, because it's almost like, think of like coffee table, like this is almost going to be like the feet. So that will sit into there. And it's important that like here where the top of the vase is going to be, which is there, you see how the leaves have actually come out. So they will actually sort of give me a platform. But it's nice to use, like, say, a tight bud, and then because then they're not all exactly the same. So as I said, it's like 4 full ones there, and then the bud there. So, and then I'm just going to put these into your beautiful. Perfect.
So we are going to glue everything down using Isomalt. We're not going to glue the flowers in. We're just going to set those in. But the Isomalt is going to be a really, really strong glue between the Isomalt pieces. So the vase to the frame, all of the pocket watch, the perfume bottle, all of the brooches that we made, we're going to use liquid Isomalt to attach all of that together and make sure everything stays together nice and sturdy and nothing falls over.
That's true. We don't want drama.
No. So I'm going to glue my frame down onto the frame that we found at the thrift store yesterday, and we just filled the center of it with a little bit of red cardstock just to give us a nice base, but I do want to make sure that my frame is glued down. So I am just going to lift up, and I'm actually going to use Isomalt for this, so I'm going to move my frame over, I'm going to pour out a little bit of Isomalt right to the cardstock, and it will melt into the surface of the two pieces and keep it nice and securely on there. I spray all my finished Isomalt pieces with the clear edible glaze spray to lock out humidity and keep them nice and shiny. After we filmed this video, we held a live demonstration at the Sweet Chalet where we also demonstrated how you could apply these techniques onto a smaller project, more suitable for a cake topper, just to give you even more options on how you can use these techniques. I had such a good time. I think it came out great. Thank you so much for hanging out.
It was a great collaboration.
It was. Maybe we should do it again sometime.
Yeah, maybe in the summer.
Ooh, well, look out for that. Yeah. So yeah, if you want to learn more about you, where should they go?
So to nicholaslodge.com, and obviously there's links on YouTube to Katie Sue's my Facebook page, and also obviously my YouTubes, and as I said, that's where you'll find all the full tutorials on the flowers.
Yes, perfect. So make sure that you subscribe to that channel for all of the awesome tutorials, more in depth, super intricate about everything that you could ever want to know about this. And also make sure to subscribe to this channel and my YouTube channel. All my social media will have tons of different information about working with Isomalt, the molds that I use, stuff like that. And hopefully we will see you again soon in another video.
So we hope you've enjoyed this Vintage Valentine collaboration.
Yeah.
And
see you next time.
Yeah, bye.